Thank you very much for joining Point Talks, Agon. It's great to have you here, and it would be much big pleasure to have you here in Sarajevo, but situation is like it is now. So that's it. Like I will ask you, first question is connected with pandemic. Like, how much would you say that COVID-19 pandemic influenced your activities? Did you focus your work more on pandemic-related topics during last year?
No, thanks for having me first. I was actually my last flight abroad was in Sarajevo last year in March before everything shut down. That was my first time in Sarajevo, and it was my last trip abroad. And I was then doing this regional tour, working on a project, and then that was the last week before everything shut down. And then, of course, the impact was tremendous. Not necessarily the work focused initially in the first couple of weeks and months. There was a lot of discussion, since I work on issues of democracy and human rights, on how the pandemic will impact these issues. So all the topics started to revolve around the impact of COVID. But with time, I think we started to adjust, into the new reality of COVID being there in a way, as a presence on having impact on everything. But the main focus continued to be on the general challenges that kind of COVID impacted, or amplified in its various ways. If I could just maybe summarize that way.
Yeah. Who are actually people who are writing for your blog, sbunker.net, and what is your target audience?
Well, we started around 5 or 6 years ago. It was a community of, think tankers, academics, activists, gravitating around the center. So we have, left liberals, sometimes also even conservative, but like more gravitating around the center. And people I would define as people who are trying to debate on issues and not feed the polarization, but actually discuss about ideas in a non-polarizing and in a more constructive way. So it's we've had more than 200 and 300 local authors write for us over the years. Sporadically. It's not some are full time, some are more sporadic, and the audience is it's not a mainstream media. It's more of a niche platform where this kind of community discusses ideas. It's a small community, but it's influential in a way, because this is the kind of the sphere where public ideas are kind of discussed, and it shapes opinion in kind of more decision-making circles, I would say less, but also like in civil society, among journalists, so in that kind of area.
Yeah, how would you generally describe the influence of your blog on Kosovo people views on democracy?
Influence is always very hard to measure. I don't know. Sometimes you feel like you're constantly hitting the wall, and and it's a lot of preaching to the converted, because there is variety, as I said, and pluralism in the platform. Not everybody thinks alike. But I think it did have an influence in creating at least some space in some critical moments in Kosovo's very polarized scene over the past years, to creating a space for debate on actual issues, rather than on keeping the agenda focused on issues rather than the political spin of political parties. So I think in a couple of moments we were able to impose this agenda, although still from the margins and from a niche kind of audience.
Yeah. What is your opinion generally about state of human rights in Kosovo?
It's a mixed bag. From a legislative framework perspective, things are good. We have a very progressive legislative framework. Constitution is very progressive, very highly advanced. But implementation is always lagging in a lot of areas, especially minority rights. not just ethnic, but also like LGBT rights and things like that, but it's picking up. It's picking up because of because of a lot of very vibrant civil society, especially on gender, on environmental rights. There's civil society is increasingly demanding that the things that are written are implemented, and there have been some successes in winning these legal battles, in educating the system and to work better. But of course, there's still a lot of problems. Domestic violence, for example, keeps popping up as a very, especially during the pandemic. Women's, women being killed and police not providing enough protection to women in these domestic violence cases, LGBT rights. Also I said environmental rights. These rivers. These hydropower plants, despite all these protections, by the law, it's the power structures keep winning in most cases. So I would describe it as a big mixed bag. A lot of problems with lack of implementation, but a lot of also civic reaction to it. And it's going to take some time, but we'll get there.
You had elections a few weeks, months ago. What do you say? How much the pandemic affected the election process in Kosovo in different ways, like voter turnout? Which prevention measures have been enforced on the day of the election, and who was in charge of the monitoring tasks of enforcing the measures, actually?
I think the pandemic played a huge role in the elections, but not necessarily for the reasons of the technical and operational part of people showing up to vote. We had a record turnout despite the pandemic, but the pandemic played a role in two ways. First, because we had a government downfall during the pandemic, and that triggered a huge reaction, and that showed also in the result in a large part of the electorate kind of shifting towards the anti-establishment parties. It also played a huge role economically. The economy was quite devastated from the pandemic, and I think that also fed into the anger. But in terms of the impact on the actual election day, I don't think it played a huge role. Measures were put in place. Once you had to go in, you always had to have a mask. Your hands would be, you had to do the disinfections and things like that. That was relatively, implemented fairly nicely. I'm not sure who actually I'm pretty sure Ministry of Health and the Electoral Commission had some sort of joint mechanism to do that, but it was not an issue that was widely discussed. The measures were undertaken, and things went well. The problem was the campaign. Actually, that's the political parties campaigning in the middle of winter in closed environments. That was a huge problem, and most parties got a lot of fines for breaking the COVID rules. Implementation was seriously lacking there.
Yeah, and what do you think? How COVID-19 pandemic influenced the results of elections in Kosovo? Actually,
I think I think a lot. Because we saw a huge shift in the unprecedented win. Almost doubling of votes by within a year, within the pandemic year. So obviously it played a role. But it was not only the pandemic. It was things were building up that way for other reasons, relations with Serbia, a huge anti-establishment sentiment, driven by anti-corruption kind of sentiment. But I think the year of the pandemic and the way in which the government fell during a pandemic really triggered a huge emotional response that explains the results. So it goes to show that the pandemic did in many countries, just like in other countries, it just amplified whatever problems or processes were underway. It just made them, speeded things up, because of how it kind of impact everything: economy, society, politics.
How will Vetevendosi victory actually in election affect Kosovo political dynamics? And do you expect more stability in the Kosovo government now?
Everything will depend on what happens in the next 2 weeks in terms of stability, because there is this crucial issue of electing a president. While they have a solid majority, they have a government, the inability to get to 80 votes for the president, or at least get a quorum, which requires some cooperation from the opposition, might trigger new elections. Now, nobody wants them, not even the public opinion. Most parties are not interested after going through all this to go to elections again. So it's a game of chicken now, of who's going to, because Ndosi wants to have Vyosal Osmani as president, whereas the opposition has some leverage, and they might want to impose a different candidate. If this obstacle is overcome, then this will be definitely a 3-4 year stable, relatively stable government for the first time after a long time. How it impacts, it's a huge shift. It's the biggest political shift in Kosovo in the last 20 years. It's an anti-establishment wave that not only changed the government, but it's now also changing the opposition, because the opposition is realizing that it has to reform. We have already one of the key opposition parties, electing a 37-year-old for its new leader. So, it's a really transformative moment that changes the entire political landscape.
Yeah. And was there much misinformation surrounding the elections, and how it influenced voters and elections results? And what was the most spread misinformation, if you can remember?
Well, obviously there was a lot of political spin, just like in any campaign, but it's mostly domestic. We did not see much of, although there was some external attempts to interfere in the campaign, but it was not the main one. Mostly it was domestic. It was, effectively the scene was divided between an anti-establishment camp and establishment parties. The narratives of the establishment parties were mostly trying to frame Kurti and Ndosi as anti-American, anti-Western, and things like that. Some of these, and whereas the Ndosi also kind of used a tactic of basically boycotting critical media entirely, or not even appearing in media, and even refusing to appear anywhere where they might, where their messaging could be hampered. So they only focused on social media. So in a way, they prevented any criticism or being subjected to any criticism or questions. So these were the two kind of main tactics used. Externally, there were some, in critical moments, in 2 or 3 occasions, interference by Russia and Serbia, mostly in response to actors in Kosovo who are promoting unification with Albania. Whenever somebody in Kosovo says that, Russian embassy reacts, or Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They like to hear, I think, these people that kind of message, and then they kind of also give space for local actors to enter a debate. So on that topic, they have been they entered the public discourse.
And how much political parties used the social media through the political campaign in terms of because it was a pandemic and they couldn't have bigger gatherings? So did they use it more than usual?
Obviously, Facebook in Kosovo is huge. I think it's the mainstream platform now for everything. As I said, the winning party boycotted all mainstream TV channels and focused only on social media, and only appeared once. The leader only appeared in one TV station in the end of the campaign. Facebook was the mainstream, and even there was some physical events as well. A lot of the parties broke the rules. They had these indoor halls with people coming up. But even in those cases, it was through social media that they were trying to showcase how full their halls are, to kind of indicate support. Social media was key in a way. Without Facebook and Instagram as well. For example, Vyosal Osmani was likely to become the new president. Her campaign was essentially focused a lot on Instagram, on having these Instagram chats with are pop stars, celebrities, actors, things like that. So I think social media in these elections were the main media.
Yeah, and as my last question, I would like to ask you, what are your plans for the future, for your blog, and the other things that you are doing actually?
Just try to keep doing the same things. Keep the focus on the issues and on the agenda. Try to remove the values debates from the political spin of the political parties. And secondly, try to build consensus on those issues and not fall for the trap of the polarization. That is really crippled Kosovo over the past decade. With whatever opportunity we have. We have the blog, which is one platform. We also have a network of or critical thinking school for young activists that kind of is an extension of that, of sort of pretty much the same authors or people go into the on the terrain and talk to young people, to give lectures. So that's another platform we have through the as an extension of the blog. So keep doing what what we've always done, and just adjust to the new environment.
So thank you very much for this talk, and I hope to see you in Sarajevo in better times.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to my next visit.